So this paper is focused on the political process of medieval expulsions of Jews. And today I'm going to work through narratives of opportunities for expulsion in Constance, Germany, documenting how the treatment of Jews fit into ongoing political conflicts among Christians. In Constance, class conflict between the gentry, high status guilds, and low status guilds remade the city's governing structure. Intra-Christian civic conflict was grounds for reconsidering the inclusion of Jews. Intervention by the German emperor hastened the othering of the city's resident Jews. And eventually, city leaders chose ethno-religious exclusion as an affirmation of civic solidarity and a rejection of civic instability that the Jews came to represent. A little bit of just framing of the paper first before we get into the history of things. Symbolic boundaries divide people into groups through identifying categorical differences, such as in personal appearance, speech, cultural heritage, and more. Governments institutionalize social or symbolic boundaries, reserving different exercise of authority over different categorical groups. Now, when institutionalized, symbolic boundaries are also social boundaries. That is, they segment the material lives and opportunities of different parts of the population. Now, by classification, governments create social structure. In medieval Europe, concepts of symbolic groups included biological heritage and religious heritage. As Geraldine Hang summarized, and this has already been referenced today as well, in medieval Europe, differences were, quote, electively essentialized in order to distribute positions and powers differentially. This study is interested in why the institutionalization of a symbolic boundary, particularly political institutionalization, changes. Why would Jews be expelled from a city? I argue that the precipitating process of an expulsion is one that sows doubt among Christians that Jews are reliable members of the civic community. Now, there are a couple other arguments out there in literature, mainly in three camps. One scholarly tradition focuses on the financial utility of Jewish subjects, attributing expulsion to governments either satisfying pressing financial needs by dispossessing Jews, forcing short sales, or simply confiscating their assets, or else exploiting Jews to the point that governments could no longer extract anything further, making Jews disposable. This offers no insights as to why Jews would be othered and exploited in the first place, and it's not especially processual. Another explanation focuses on conflict between unequal groups as a major force in motivating and guiding exclusion and violence. One idea is that Jews were expelled through popular pressure because they were an economic threat to Christians. On the other side of things, political elites might initiate exclusion to reinforce their position and existing social structure among Christians. And third, constructivist theories stress new ideas and revised meanings. Broadly, minority groups may come to be seen as threatening the culture of a majority group. And elsewhere, I have argued that new religious ideas created an opportunity for expulsions by recategorizing Jews as threatening Christian community health and righteousness. And Mundell claims a similar cause for the 1290 expulsion from England. Each of these perspectives locates causation in different processes. So today I'll consider their merits through analyzing the history of the city of Constance, Germany, in the late 14th century to the mid 15th century. Now, Constance was a well-established city involved in long-distance trade to Italy, the Champagne fairs, and Spain, as well as to African and Eastern Mediterranean coasts. Buying and selling for this business required money exchangers and money lending, and Jews were brought in for this reason in 1242 to supplement Christian financiers. After a Black Death pogrom in 1349, in which several hundred Jews were killed, Jews returned and resettled in Constance around 1375. Jews then lived in Constance until 1448, when the remainder of the community moved to Austrian cities. In the intervening decades, Constance experienced class conflict, financial downturns, and a major church conference that sparked a crusade within Europe. The city government issued orders for Jews to leave the city 4 times, but never followed through on enforcing expulsion. Tracing the histories of these episodes in history provides insight on what processes lead or do not lead to expulsion. Now, for the sake of time, today I'm only going to cover 3 periods in the 15th century. So we're going to start off with 1420 to 1430. In the 1420s, conflict in the city picked up. Different parties were trying to work out how to maintain a balance of power, and how to have the power structure correspond to who was in the city. Stopping a mercantile oligarchy was of the utmost importance to the majority of the citizenry. Now, the main issue was that some financially mobile guildsmen had intermarried with the gentry, and the guilds were afraid of the economic and political consequences of losing their most prominent members to the new business of trading corporations and to a different social group. The city government was structured to balance the interests and representation of the guilds and the nobility. So it was a problem that the private interests of some guildsmen were now aligned with the nobility via marriage and business connections, even though they publicly represented the guilds. So the city was trying to figure out how to police with wealth accumulation that created social instability, and they banned some commercial activities. Some of the rich guildsmen emigrated to nearby cities in 1427, with others soon following. Now, with several of the leading families having left, city leaders tried a new social tactic to limit cross-class social mixing. They tried banning dances, which I think is a page out of Footloose. Additionally, some of the rich guildsmen were expelled from the city. Now, banning social functions and expelling prominent citizens certainly speaks to some desperation about how to handle the situation. Now, the year 1429 brought a cocktail factors of unrest to the city. Most of the nobility tried to relinquish their citizenship in September in an assembly before the city council, and the guilds responded by locking the city gates, assembling their militias, and threatening that city residents would loot the guildsmen's possessions within the city. At the same time, the city confronted a small recession, and then in December, a rumor started in nearby Ravensburg that Jews ritually murdered a city youth. Latent ongoing anti-Semitism was sharpened by the possibility that Jews committed such an offensive act, and the Jews were imprisoned little less than a month later in early 1430. For the German Emperor Sigismund, Jews' imprisonment was an excuse to intervene and an opportunity for financial gain to find the city and resolve his debts there. He tried to reassert control over the Jews and void a 1425 agreement with the city that delegated to the city government dominion and tax rights over Jews living there. These sorts of agreements had been ongoing for the past several decades. In July, the city council agreed to pay a fine, and Sigismund promised further intervention later in the year when he planned to visit the region, and the Jews were released. But the imprisonment of Jews was not the main storyline. While the Jews were captive, the conflict between the gentry, elite guild members, and the lower guilds continued. The Jews were imprisoned again at the end of July by the lower guilds in a putsch that ejected many of the guild representatives from the city council. The lower guilds were mad about how the upper guilds handled the negotiations over the Constance Jews. It was rumored that some of the council members had received bribes from the Jews. So this echoes ongoing concerns that city leaders would line their own pockets instead of protecting public interest. Sigismund decided that he himself would mediate between the parties in the city, and initially he assessed a huge fine for the disturbance and mistreatment of quote unquote his Jews. The city government negotiated down, and ultimately the city paid a large fine, and the Jews paid fines to both the city and the emperor. Most of the mediation concerned broader political conflict in the city, though. Sigismund reorganized the city guilds and the city legislature, relocating socioeconomic cleavages to be internal to the guilds rather than between them. His decrees seemed to have neutralized conflict, and they were enforced for over 100 years. And the fine extorted from the constant Jewish community thoroughly wrecked the ability of the Jews to play the banking role the city government had wanted them to play. Unfortunately, Sigismund's resolution, while creating peace overall in the city, disrupted the mostly peaceable relationship between the Christian community and the Jews in Constance. And regrouping after 1430, the city began to curtail Jewish inclusion. As part of Sigismund's decrees, the city was to simplify its citizenship categories by eliminating one for residents that retained citizenship rights elsewhere, usually gentry or elite merchants. And maybe this directed the city's attention to the category of Jewish citizens too. First, Jews were forbidden in 1431 from holding property mortgages, which caused them much financial damage, as they had to unload these mortgages in short sales. In September 1431, Constance resolved to admit no new Jews. These appear to be initial steps to reposition Jews and their position as partial citizens. In 1429, going back just to the previous slide, the city had used expulsion to solve problems of uncertainty about loyalty and commitment among the gentry and rich guildsmen. And now in 1432, Jews were told by the Rat to leave in November. Now in November, this was extended to March. And then a repeated expulsion order in 1433 gave May as the new date. And then this was extended to July. During this time period, the city was unable to get all the Jews to leave and eventually just dropped it and reversed course. Now remember that Jews had been repossessed by the emperor in the 1430 agreement after a long history of dominion under the city government. Now generally cities wanted control over taxation. Darman argues that cities at the time were trying not to destroy the financial power of their Jewish communities, but the empire was doing this with abandon. So not only had the emperor reclaimed the Jews, drawing them outside the purview of the city government, but in doing so, he also decimated their economic capacity. Sigismund's extraordinary assessment on the constant Jews, plus the economic fallout, would have emphasized two things. Jews were not categorically part of the constant civic community, and Jews could not be economically loyal to the civic community. So very clearly, Jews' economic behaviors would have been at odds with the city economy, and so doubt about their governability, just like the merchant elite who had caused so much trouble in the preceding decades. So their continued presence was a threat to city stability. Now, what the city does after the city's expulsion attempts is instructive about their thinking. From 1434, records of Jewish taxes were moved to be with non-residents, a category shift in the position of Jews within the city. As a process, the city used administrative means to alienate their Jewish community. Jews advocated for themselves to avoid being uprooted, and their efforts were at least partly successful. But for the city leaders, Jewish otherness had never been felt so strongly. Now, the next hiccup occurred in 1440, when the city decreed expulsion again, but it was not enforced or even extended like in the previous decade. And in 1443, another ritual murder accusation again prompted the imprisonment of Jews in Constance. And this one directly involved a Constance Jew. Some Jews tried to flee, knowing that imprisonment in the region historically led to exorbitant ransoms or to execution, and they were pursued by Constance citizens and forcibly brought back. In fact, all the Jews in the region were imprisoned in Constance. Again, Constance dragged its feet, though, on expelling Jews, and the city refrained from genocidal violence. From the late 1430s, the empire had been pursuing a more aggressive policy of extracting from cities via Jews, trapping Jews in the Christian perception that Jews were the king's Handlungsträger, or operatives. Now, this ritual murder accusation seems to be the excuse the city needed to confront the empire. The city wrote to the Emperor Friedrich III, who had just been elected and crowned that same year, about what to do and how to resolve the issue. Now, negotiations went on for 5 years, with the Jews imprisoned the whole time. The imprisoned Jews were finally released in 1448, but this time the city does not appear to have paid a fine or received any payment from the Jews like in 1430, and neither did the king extort anything from the Jews. However, the price of Jews' release was that they sell their assets and their property. Forcing the Jews to liquidate their possessions would have compelled Jews to accept low prices and to put Christian buyers on an advantage. So Christian residents certainly still benefited personally from this racket. We'll close up now. So getting to the implications of this, the social history of Constance from the 14th into the 15th century was a history of struggle for cooperation and social solidarity as material and social context changed in the city. Despite having material and ideological conditions that might have triggered the exclusion of Jews, the city government never actually expelled Jews. It was an action by the emperor that removed Jews from the city. Oh, that's what I forgot to say, sorry. So in 1448, what ends up happening is that the Jews are allowed to leave after they sell their possessions and moved to lands owned by the emperor's brother. So the civic community was generally in the midst of a group-making process, but it was secondarily related to excluding Jews and primarily related to the city commune. Within the city, different groups had different obligations in order to access rights and collective goods like security. The rich guildsmen and gentry earned distrust, and the city denied them rights and security in 1429 even expelling some of them. This was an important precedent for the city government's 1431 decree expelling Jews. Although the city government removed Jews from the civic community via imprisonment in 1443, the city still did not formally expel Jews. Instead, civic leaders bargained with the emperor because his authority and intervention was what was truly at stake. Now, in Constance, to sum up my argument, it was an ethnic process that resulted in the institutional exclusion of Jews that was embedded in a broader non-ethnic process. Ultimately, Jews were removed from Constance because the civic regime could not effectively govern them. This case demonstrates that interethnic antagonism is not necessarily a proximate cause for exclusion. Institutionalized social closure can occur without narratives of economic threat or cultural threat. Further, malice or individual selfishness are not the ultimate root of exclusion in this case. Societal level intolerance can originate from pro-social communal concern. Thank you.